Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm interviewing a good friend of mine I've known for some while now, Andrew Craig, best-selling author, investor. I mean, you know everything there is about finance. If I was going to ask a question, it will be going to Andrew. So look, I think this is the potentially the fourth interview, either third or fourth interview
Yeah, I
that
think
we
it's the fourth. Yeah.
fourth. Anyone sticking around, what we're going to do is we're actually going to recap on investing, and then we're going to start backwards. We're going to be talking about what we should be looking at, what we've overlooked as times have moved forward and extremely fast. And we're going to go through how to invest and make some really smart decisions. And we're going to do this in 3 stages. So stick around, and I'd love to hear your comments or your key takeaways on what you've learned in this podcast. So it's going to be a long one. Please do stick around. Andrew, thanks so much for coming back onto the podcast, mate. I'm excited to get into it with you.
Oh, it's great to see you. Although, yeah, I've got a big tough act to follow when you're saying you know everything there is to know about finance. I don't think Warren Buffett knows everything there is to know about finance, but we'll have a crack. Hopefully, I know enough to be vaguely interesting.
You're my go-to guy.
Well, that's great.
There we go.
For conventional stuff, at least. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So look, Andrew, as I said, we're gonna start backwards. We're gonna be overlooking everything, starting at centre back on the field, working forwards. What have we overlooked as times have moved forward now when it comes to investing? Because I think one of the most searched questions is how to make money and how to invest on Google,
Yeah.
right? So that's a huge thing. But I feel like we're missing out on a lot of the basics, especially when you hear conversations on what people are investing in and what they're looking for. So if we jump back, what do you feel that we're overlooking as investments and making good financial decisions?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm on my soapbox here, and I sort of preemptively warn everyone watching this that I'm very repetitive. So apologies to people who've watched me before because I often say the same stuff, but there's this Latin phrase, very pretentious phrase, repetitio mater studiorum est, which means repetition is the mother of learning. So if I bang on about stuff, it's because I really passionately believe in this stuff being really important. So in terms of what we've missed, well, it's right there in plain sight to me still. 90% or more of British adults do not have a stocks and shares ISA, right? So that means that 90% or more is somewhere between 90 and 95%. And if you do the maths on like 3 million people have got them, 56 million British adults, how many are kind of students or whatever. But the vast majority, like 90% plus of sentient, educated, intelligent British adults do not knowingly or proactively invest in the stock market, right? So, that's hiding in plain sight. That's causing untold problems for everyone because one of the big themes I go back to is the most important vector for becoming wealthy in for anyone. The highest probability way of becoming wealthy is through investment, right? Through long run investment in the fundamental stuff that's worked for 2 centuries, and it's been financial markets are just a technology. That's all they are. They don't care what background you are. They don't care what your education level is. They've been there as a technology for 2 centuries: shares, bonds, real estate, commodities, cash, etc., etc. And so, but 90% plus people in this country are not involved, right? And so similarly, 60% of people in this country don't know what compounding is. So we were talking about it a minute ago. I've just only recently kicked off our YouTube channel. I've been doing blogs for years and years, but so I put a lot of content up basically saying, the US stock market's done 10.4% annualized for the last century, right? 1923 to 2023. And if you compound returns on 10% of an average British salary at 10 and a bit percent, you can turn a few £100 a month into more than £1 million, right? That's just a fact. That's just an irrefutable mathematical fact, right? Whenever I post this stuff, whenever I shoot YouTube videos about it, whenever I write articles about it, there's this, the trolls, right? Haters gonna hate. There's always trolls saying, "What a load of nonsense! This man's full of, can I swear on this podcast?"
Yeah.
This man's full of nonsense. Let's keep it clean. But and it's because 60% of British adults, because we equip people so badly in our education system in terms of understanding how maths works at a fundamental level, understanding even the first thing about finance, right? 60% of British adults don't understand compounding. So when you say to people, look, if you save £200 a month and put it into stock market investment, if you do that from your 20s to your late 50s or your 60s, alongside everything else you might want to do. If you want to do crypto, if you want to do trading, if you want to do property, but whatever, just make sure these fundamental building blocks are in place. If you do that, you've got a very, very, very high chance of having a large 6 or low 7-figure sum by the time you're in your late 50s, right? The tragedy is that no one's doing it, And so so very, very few people end up with that. And everyone has this stupid idea that like capital markets are for the rich. It's like, no, no, no. If you learn about capital markets, you're much more likely to be rich, but we're not teaching people about that. So that's, I think, kind of what's hiding in plain sight. And if I may, just one other thing that kind of occurs to me, there's a brilliant lady called Merrin Somerset Webb, who used to be the senior editor of Money Week magazine. She's now a journalist at Bloomberg. And she posted something on LinkedIn over the weekend, which was brilliant, basically talking about how Gordon Brown sold all of Britain's gold reserves at like the century low, not quite, but like but that decision he made, whenever it was 15 years ago, when gold was trading at like 230 quid an ounce, gold is now trading at whatever it is, 1900 quid an ounce, whatever it is, it's up 10x or so. That has robbed the UK of billions and billions and billions of pounds. And it's just an example of how egregiously incompetent our politicians are and so many other people in the system are. And the point that Merrin was making yesterday is that Coutts, which is the private banking bit of NatWest, has just made a decision to basically strategically dump loads of UK shares and shift their client like billions of pounds into global shares. And she's making the point that in the same way that Gordon Brown made that decision about gold, but everybody hated gold, everybody thought gold was rubbish, so let's just sell all our government's gold reserves. Right now, there's this huge theme where basically British shares, the London stock market is in all sorts of trouble. It's really unloved. Nobody loves it. And I think that's another thing missing in plain sight. I think from the vantage point of even 5 years from now, but certainly 10 years from now, people will look back kind of regardless of, Labour being in power or the Tories being in power or whatever may or may not happen with Brexit and Britain and everything else. I just think British shares and the British stock market have got to this absolutely terrible, like on their knees point of capitulation. And usually in history, as with the Gordon Brown gold example, when something's in all sorts of trouble, it's probably going to be quite an interesting thing for the next 10 or 20 years. So I kind of quietly hope, also because I'm British and I live in England, like I sort of hope that that's going to be right, because we've lost nearly half of the companies from the London stock market in the last 15 years. It's very, very difficult to raise money in the UK to do like software stuff and tech stuff and biotech stuff, and frankly, it really pisses me off, and it's a real tragedy, and there are all sorts of reasons around that. So basically, financial literacy is still rubbish. Very few people are doing this. That's a tragedy for all of those tens of millions of people. It's a tragedy for British society. It's a tragedy for the London stock market. Hopefully, we're kind of at or near a nadir, and if people get into stock market investment and maybe into stock market investment in British stuff, on a sort of, if most of your audience is like, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s, whatever they might be, could that be a really good place to be for the next 20 or 30 years from now to retirement and make those supernormal returns, which will make you a 6 or 7 figure sum? I think it probably will be. So sorry, it's a very long answer. You can shut me up, by the way, whenever you like.
Hey, it's a good answer. I mean, I'm just going to be writing a few things down as we go through it so that we can just dive into a few other things. So, we talk about the education system isn't teaching people about money, which is why in the UK we have this horrendous relationship with money, why we have bad money habits. Everyone, you might have seen some of my videos, we blame the cost of living, but yet really, if we go into the local city centres and airports, they're all rammed. But it's that reflection at the end of the day going, oh, now I've not got any money because I've spent it all on the wrong things. But what I want to dive into and just raise a couple of things here is bad money relationships really stem from a lack of education through the school and parents, and how parents have been, which then gets passed on, and that vicious cycle continues. And then the bad thing really where we're at right now, which I think is quite negative for people, is that there is a lot of advertisement on a lot of speculative stuff. So there's no fundamentals being taught. The parents don't know the fundamentals. But what we are seeing is we're seeing huge marketing adverts, huge budgets that are pumped into trading platforms, speculative stuff, crypto. And that's all that everyone is seeing, especially the younger generation. And let's face it, eventually what is classed as the baby boomers, who the smarter ones who have gone into the fundamentals, they're going to die off. There's still no education being taught around the stock market, commodities, gold, even being taxed. So what I want to ask, I don't think it's ever going to change. I think that's the horrific thing. We can independently get this message out there, but with the UK, it seems to be getting worse. And I say this quite strongly. It seems to be monthly now. It's getting pretty bad. It's not like once every year. The UK seems to be pretty bad.
Across the piece. Well, the government's printed untold billions of QE. You know, as you say, well, as I just said, 90% of people don't knowingly invest in stocks and shares. Most people under the age of 40, or maybe even under the age of 45 or 50, go. I describe it as white belts fighting black belts, right? They instead of going, like I need to sort my finances out, I figured that out. They don't then go, what's an ISA? What's a pension? What's gold? You know, what are stocks and shares? How has the financial system worked for 200 years since it was invented, by the way, by us and the Dutch? You know, so we have a huge structural and sort of historical advantage by virtue of being British. Because of exactly what you said, because of the power of social, because of groupthink, because of crowd mentality, they listen to their mate Dave in the pub who's made a few quid in Bitcoin, and they go straight past all of that stuff. They think somebody like me is old and boring and stupid and just not with the program. And it's like, I was actually just writing about this yesterday for I'm doing a new updated edition of my second book, which is a workbook, Live on Less, Invest the Rest, and trying to inculcate all this stuff in it. And I was talking about, you know, how I get criticized all the time for sort of not understanding crypto, and crypto is going to change the world. And the point I'd make is, the internet was going to change the world in 1999, right? It was obvious. Of course, the internet's going to change the world. It's the internet. Today, potentially crypto is going to change the world. It's crypto. But 90% or more of the investments, the internet investments you might have made in the late 90s went to zero, right? And in like when mobile phones first came on the scene, like Nokia was a 200 billion euro company or thereabouts, and everyone had a Nokia, and Nokia was in the Matrix movies, you know, the Nokia banana phone. And Nokia was, if you'd said to somebody in like the late 90s, Nokia is going to be a $20 billion company. It's going to fall 90% in value. And Apple, which at the time was making weird little pink computers, right, and was like this small computer company, will dominate the global mobile phone market. And there'll be these things called smartphones. Most people would have told you you're mad. And to me, that's a bit like saying Bitcoin will definitely be, or Ether will definitely be, the Apple or the Google of crypto and blockchain and everything else. In 1999, Facebook didn't exist for another 5 years. It only was created in 2004, right? So in the 90s, you can be excited about the internet, but one of the biggest winners of the internet came along 5 years after that. So right now with crypto, you know, we have all these people just wildly enthused about crypto. I don't think that's necessarily the wrong thing to do, other than the fact that you have to understand that in any new creative sort of tech paradigm, most of the participants from the early days will be losers on a 20-year view. And you don't know what the winners are going to be. So look, that stuff's all fine, but you know, I don't know how to answer the question, what does Britain do about educating people? I mean, you and I are working really hard on this. Other people are working hard on it. Human nature is such that people like easy answers. People want to make fast money, not slow money. But, you know, similarly, I mean, there's a lot, from what I see, we were talking before you click record about Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom podcast and Tim Ferriss's podcast and all these guys. Rightly or wrongly, I feel like people are getting much better about like the gym and nutrition and sports and health and fitness and longevity. It feels to me like there is a lot of that online, and like maybe, you know, your average 25-year-old guy or girl today is probably somewhat better at that stuff than they were in 1985 or certainly 1965 when they're all smoking 30 fags a day and, you know, drinking loads of pints. Dare we hope that a similar dynamic may come to the fore in financial literacy? I hope so, because we really need it. We really need it for sure.
I feel like that is correct. When it comes to finances, I definitely think there is a shift in, there's less smoking, more people are aware of their health. And also, I think where people look up to some of these big influencers now and big voices, I think they do think, you know, there is a direct correlation between being healthy and fit and doing quite well successfully, whatever that might be.
And with the opposite sex, right? Which most people are quite keen on sorting that out as well, right? So there's some strong motivations to do a good job with all that stuff, right?
Yeah. And I hope when it comes to the finance is that I think where we're going wrong is we want to jump to the end goal. So when someone is earning, let's just take a typical average individual who is still in a job, that they're earning their salary, they have their bills, and whatever is left over, I think what they're doing is they're being very easily influenced by, okay, rather than going, let's get the emergency fund sorted, let's get some cash reserves, let's get some commodities, and let me start taking advantage of some ISAs that are wrapped, you know, they're jumping straight to that, almost what would be called like war chest capital, you know, the venture capital, where it's like, do you know what? I've got X amount after doing all the fundamentals. I've got an extra 100 quid. Maybe I do a bit of seed investment. They're jumping right to that. And I think there's that there's that bridge that isn't there in the middle to say, look, slow down. Have you even got an emergency fund? And they
Well,
go, what's
and
that?
I posted the other day about compound interest, about, if you do this from your 20s to your like late 50s or 60s, like I said 5 minutes ago, you've got a really good chance of being a millionaire, right? So the average person in London's on 50 grand a year, right? The average person in Britain's on 27 or whatever. 10% of that post-tax is about 250 quid at the lowest end, and obviously it's a lot more if you're on 50 grand, and if you're lucky enough to be on 80 or 90 grand, you're a software engineer or whatever, it's a lot more. And I made the point that, if you can just save and invest 10% of that into sensible stuff that's worked for 200 years every month without fail, don't think about the market, don't totally ignore the news. That's a big rookie mistake. Is, what's going on in the news? The S&P had two of its best years in the last century in 2020 and 2021, right? If you'd interviewed the average person in the street, say, what do you think the stock market's going to do this year, given coronavirus and lockdowns? They would have said, well, obviously it's going to go down. I don't want to own the stock market. No, it went up 18 point whatever and 27% in those 2 years. There's a very little correlation between like the real economy and the stock market. But so somebody came back to me on a YouTube video I did a few weeks ago on all of these points, saying, oh, yet another bloody person online telling me to get rich slow and be rich when I'm old, right? Help my 60-year-old self. If I want 1,000 quid to do, because I made the point, like, if a 25-year-old spends 1,000 quid on television, like a 60-inch TV today, that 1,000 quid could be worth 60 grand in their pension by the time they're 65 at just basic returns in the stock market. And they're like, the grand today is worth more to me at 30 than it's going to be worth to me at 60. Convince me otherwise. And the point I made, and I always talk about like carrot and stick, bad news and good news, right? The carrot is you'll be a millionaire. You'll be able to take care of you and yours. You'll have a great 30 years of your life where you don't have to work, which is one of the greatest blessings of modernity, right? Is that like 99% of human beings who ever lived in history who didn't have access to capital markets and the stock market and stuff worked until they died, which was usually at like the age of 48 or whatever, down a mine, We are one of the first few generations in history that can aspire to retire, maybe even as early as 50 if you do this really well. But even from 60, if you're going to live to 100, you've got 40 years to fund where if you do a good job, you could have an amazing life and do all the things you ever dreamed about doing, right? Yeah. So that's the carrot. But actually, if anything, the way I answer this person online, I want a grand when I'm 30, I want to spend it on TVs, I want to spend it on holidays. The stick is, if anything, more powerful because people are risk averse more than people care more about a loss than they care about a gain, right? So the stick is more powerful than the carrot. And the answer is, if you don't do this, you are going to be properly poor. Yeah. Like fact, right? Because governments all over the world simply that's the bad news. Governments are already bankrupt, right? The pension system is already in crisis. People are like, oh, Labour will come into power, they'll sort out. No, they can't. They can't do it. The pension system was created in 1909 to support people over the age of 70 when average life expectancy was 47. Now everybody's going to live to 100. You're going to be grindingly poor if you don't do this and if you piss all your money away losing on crypto, right? And so my argument is very simply, why not do it? Because it's really not that big a sacrifice.
I feel people are afraid to turn around and say, well, I've only got an extra £5 to invest. What's the point?
Yeah, well, I made it. That was exactly the point. 25 quid a month to begin with when you're 22 years old.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, it's like everything else in life. It's like going to the gym or eating better or whatever it is. It's all about habits, right? That brilliant Atomic Habits book, James Clear. It's if you set up a habit of putting 25 quid a month into the market with an ISA account when you're like 22 or 23, when even that might be a bit painful. So, that's like one less or two less Deliveroos a week or whatever it might be, right? Or a few less beers on a Friday night. But you just go, you hold your nose, grit your teeth and put 25 quid a month into an ISA account. You get that all set up. What happens is, to most people, is you see results and you see it building. So when you're 26 and you've got a slightly better job, you up it to 50 quid. And when you're 30, you up it to 100 quid. And by the time you're 40, you're doing 300 quid a month because you've now got a really good sales job or whatever you're doing. And that journey all the way along, like the numbers are extraordinary. If you just save and then make compound like basically stock market returns for the last century, most people will be really, really surprised by just how much that does. And then you love it. And then you want to do it, right? Because you form the habit.
There's a couple of things there. So I do big TikTok educational lives about this. Also talking, I have like this whole diagram, which I show people on my TikTok I have 33 bank accounts and it's all, it's all in an infrastructure that's automated. Yeah. I think one thing I just want to dive into here is you've got to take the emotions out of it. Yeah. So, for example, if you owe someone money, it's 100 quid, or Friday's coming up, and you've downed the tools, and you get paid on Friday. if you're left with the emotional decision at looking at your bank account and going, I've got 100 quid there. If it's in there and it hasn't automatically gone out, you are now playing with your emotions of, I'm being asked to go out with the lads or with the girls. I've got
Yeah.
100 quid spare. Whereas if it was dropped in and it automatically went out,
Yeah.
you're not then emotionally involved, and you turn around to yourself and you say, I can't. I can't go because I
And
don't have the
you
expenditure.
adjust to that pretty quickly. So that's the classic Robert Kiyosaki, rich dad, poor dad, like pay yourself first and set up that
Yeah.
infrastructure and make sure. But if it's only 10% of what you earn, if you just say, no matter what, I'm going to make sure that 10% of what I earn goes into saving and investment, no matter what, for the rest of my life, right? The outcome, the carrot is you've got a good chance of being a millionaire, even if you're on an average wage, if you do that for long enough. Most people don't believe that. That's because most people don't understand stock market investment and compounding, right? And if you do that at 22 or 23 or 20 or 29 or whatever, if you do that, if you just make that a lodestar, like I'm going to do this, and you do it, you'll find that your life rearranges itself around that reality really quite quickly. And it's not actually a sacrifice, it's just automatic. Sorry, I see you want to stop me, I just want to finish the point. But what I'm all about, Plain English Finance is our business. How to Own the World's my first book. It's about global investment, right? Owning human progress. Why does the stock market work? Because 100 years ago, there were very few aeroplanes, there were very few skyscrapers, there were no mobile phones. It's real. It's not ripping somebody's face up, trading crypto and ripping their face off and winning. It's benefiting from human progress, population growth, China's opening up, India being a software superpower, all this real tangible stuff. But do that with 10% of what you earn. And if you want to do crypto stuff, and if you want to get into trading currencies or whatever, that should be completely separate. And that's the point, is philosophically get the nuts and bolts stuff that's worked for 2 centuries done, and then go for your life with whatever else you want to do. You'll probably lose money, by the way, over time, or you might not, but there's a good chance you will. But at least this stuff you'll have 700 grand by the time you turn 62, and on the way you might be able to afford better holidays and a nicer car if you leave it long enough, right?
Yeah, and this is where I feel the mindset and the money come hand in hand. And some people go, "Oh, what load of rubbish!" It's not. It is. If I look at the people that I spend a lot of time with, and even the traits that I have high amounts of discipline, and discipline really allow you to turn around and say no, because I cannot afford it. And I feel that people that lack the discipline, I do see and I hear, and due to high volumes of comments and just the quantity of content that I do, I really have seen more so than I've ever seen before, especially being on TikTok. My God, there are a lot of victims out there. And I'm listening to a book by Arnold Schwarzenegger called Be Useful.
Yeah.
And I'm a part in the book, and I love it, where he's just saying, everyone has a choice. There are people that will complain until their dying day. This podcast was sponsored by the employment breakout program, How to Fire Your Boss and Replace Your Income. If you want a life of purpose, one with time freedom and financial stability, head to the description below where you can join a free introduction webinar to learn how business could change your life. And they will blame everyone. And one thing that I hear, and I quote this, I see it all the time when I talk about the cost of living. There is no cost of living crisis. There's a cost of living, but you still have the chance to make a plan and execute it. Is that we're all playing this weird game of poker, but if you choose to wait for the government or your employer, we can all tell you no one's coming.
Yeah.
And I feel that's the defining factor, is realizing that, right?
And it's that resilience, so if you do what I just said, let's say you're 35 when coronavirus hits, or 30, but let's say you started saving 25 quid a month, you were 22, and you started doing 50 when you were 24, and what I was saying earlier, and a cost of living crisis comes on, eggs are 20% up, bread is 20%, there's no question, your food shop is much more difficult today than it was 5 years ago. I mean, God, this sounds so middle class of me and very pretentious, but olive oil, have you seen the price of olive oil recently and fresh basil? It's like, but I really noticed stuff like that. Olive oil is like tenner for a, supermarket brand olive oil, whatever. That's up. Energy is definitely up. Electricity and gas are up for sure. But who's going to take it in their stride? Anybody who's been saving and investing 10% of their stuff in the stock market for the last 10 years, it's going to be slightly annoying, but it's going to be no more than slightly annoying. And so I was actually, God, this sounds really pretentious. I was the guest of the Lord Mayor at Mansion House a few weeks ago, sitting around the table in the Mansion House with all these really high profile economists and stuff. And I was sort of talking about this stuff, everything I'm saying now, like if only we could get most British adults to open a stocks and shares ISA, put 50 quid a month in, just do that for the whole life, it would revolutionize the lives of tens of millions of people. It would give us risk capital for, biotech companies to cure cancer, for us to build better software, buildings, everything. That's the other thing, is the capital investment in the stock market gives us the wherewithal to do amazing things. And one of Britain's problems at the moment is nobody's investing, so we can't do anything. And then why have we got a cost of living crisis? Because the government invents money out of thin air, which creates inflation, right? Because the only person who can afford to do anything at the moment is the government, because we've destroyed our equity culture, right? But parking all of that, there was a lady in the group who, was a certain kind of academic economist, and she basically went right at me and said, "You've got no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea how hard it is for somebody in Liverpool or Glasgow or, living hand to mouth, whatever." And, without sounding too harsh, that's probably right? And let's say there's 50 million British adults. Maybe it's not as many as 10%, but it might be 10% of them. 5 million of them are really economically challenged, right? And what we don't want to unpick why that is. I don't want to point fingers or say, why are you struggling so much when there's 5 million over here who are incredibly wealthy, right? There are all sorts of reasons for that. I think the main reason for it is financial literacy. It's not about, people who, the stock market is not for rich people, is that families in particular, because if you do it over many, middle class families where the grandfather invested in the stock market in the 60s, and the father and mother invested in the stock market in the 90s, and now the son's investing in the stock market now, you compound all that down, and even with huge inheritance tax, by the way, wealth builds over generations, which is why the Rothschilds are particularly wealthy. They haven't done it since 1800, right, or whatever. But my point was just that, okay, these 5 million people, 10% of British adults who are really, really challenged and their life is really, really hard for whatever reason, there's not much I can do about that, right? It's the 40 million people in the middle that I want to sort out, right? It's the 40 million people who actually have a fairly good job, are doing all right, and they could make their lives so much better and so much easier and need so much less support from the government or else if they got this stuff sorted, right? So there's always going to be people who are very challenged economically. By the way, the richest 1% of people pay 35% of the tax. So they're hopefully providing the money to try and help with that, much as everybody hates rich people. But it's that tens of millions of people in the middle who've been making very bad decisions about their finances for the last 40 or 50 years. That's where we really need to change, because that's where the juice comes from for them and for society more broadly.
But do you know what? It's not impossible, because I would turn around and say I was definitely in a percentage where it looked like all odds were against me.
Yeah.
I grew up, I was born on a council estate. I grew up on the whole thing. My parents didn't have any money. I used to hang around with people who I would never hang around with in a million years now. I used to be a bit of a terror back in the day, so, and I didn't do well in school, and I didn't even know what I was doing. So I feel like it really comes down to self-education is massive, because we know we're not going to get taught it, but I do feel the environment will dictate performance massively. That plays a huge part. You can't see up unless you're around up and you hear up and you know that there's more, so.
But the other, if I may, the other thing I think is really important and really poorly understood is the compound effect, right? Because people want, like, so I used to do this presentation, which I've done at a few universities and a few secondary schools, like big secondary schools, right? It's by compounding in finance and in life, right? So the reason that financial capital markets will make you a millionaire, even on relatively low incomes, if you do it for low enough, is because of compounding. And 60% of people don't understand that, and they go, "Oh, that's all bollocks." That on the understand compounding, right? Because that's the most important thing you'll ever understand. But it applies to life. And the analogy I use is, to your point, is like, if 3 20-year-olds are all roughly as good looking as each other, roughly as sort of fit and healthy as each other, and roughly as intelligent as each other, if one of them gets 1% better every month, you won't know. And one of them gets 1% better every month, one of them stays the same, and one of them gets 1% worse every year because they drink a bit too much and they don't exercise or else. The bit people don't realise is that at 30, they're all still mates, and 10 years later, you haven't really noticed. One of them's got a slightly better job, it's a little bit more cash. The other one's beginning to get a bit fat, and they take the piss out of him about it, and blah, blah. By the time they're at 60, the one who's got 1% better every month will be 390 times better off than the one who's stayed the same, and like 700 times better off than the one who's gone backwards 1% a year. And that's the bit people don't understand, just how powerful compounding is in your life. Like, a bit of self-discipline doesn't really make much of a difference between like 15 and 25. Makes a bit of a difference between 25 and 35 when it really starts making a huge, and that's one of the main reasons inequality exists, right? Because
But then we hear a lot of 6 months, in 12 months,
yeah.
15 months. They're very short periods. And I think we've gotten so used to the 12 to 18-month period that, people are like, well, if it doesn't happen within that 18 months, I can't
I see
succeed.
it all the time in finance. One of my biggest arguments is I go back to again and again and again, and it's a very difficult sales pitch for businesses, right? Right, is that what we're talking about is something you need to do for decades,
Yeah.
right? You to really get the amazing life-changing results, you've got to do it for decades. It's not a great pitch for a business, right? But it's true. It's got 2 centuries of evidence that what I'm saying is correct and true. It's life-changing for people. It's why most wealthy people are wealthy, not because they're cheating or, well, apart from most politicians, obviously, but moving swiftly on, most people in the private sector. And that's a difficult pitch. And time after time, I get someone on social go, I read your book, I really liked it. I started investing a few weeks ago, and I'm down 27 quid. And it's like you haven't. You might have read my book. I thank you for the comments, but you haven't understood it, because investing for a few weeks and being down tens of pounds, you've just completely missed the big picture of what the whole point is here. You invest every month for 20 to 40 years, and you will have lots of money.
It's the same. It's the same for me. Last year, I started an educational company to help people get out their jobs to go into business. And it's a real slow, and I'm really passionate, and I spent a lot of time building out this entire a program and company around it. And I always remind people, I have now NDAs and disclaimers, really reminding people this is going to happen over a really long period of time. And even then it's so unique to you. And I have to explain, it took me years, but I went hard, and I'm disciplined more than the average person. So, and that doesn't always sit well with people, which people are like, no, I want it quicker than that. And I'm like, well, I'm not the person for you, because it is such a compound effect. It is.
Yeah.
Self-mastery it's investing wisely, looking after your own money. Don't think about running a business, because if you can't look after your own money, you're not going to be dealing with profit and loss and expenditure. Forget about it. It's not going to happen.
And investors, yeah.
And then being able to clearly say your business model without looking like you're sort of flapping to someone who you might be raising money from.
But just quick to that point though, investment is about decades, right? To really get the juice, for it to really kick off and make a huge difference to your life, right? But most other improvements actually take a few years. And a lovely example of this I saw in the papers a few weeks ago. I don't know if you saw it as well. I forget the name of the lady. But there's a lady who started running, training for a marathon in I think 2019, maybe just before COVID. And she ran her first marathon in 2019 in 5.5 hours, or, something, right? But she was really chuffed she'd completed the marathon stuff. She's now in the British marathon team, and she just did the London Marathon in 2.5 hours and came 6th or something in the whole of that. And seeing her, and that's in what, 5 years. In 5 years, you look at her, you look at the physical change in her, you look at how happy and uplifted she is, you look at how successful she feels. She got that by just doing a run every single day for 5 years. And after 6 months, there wasn't much. After a year, there was a bit. After 5 years, she's gone from, not being much of a runner to being one of the top marathon runners in the UK. And it's true of everything in life, in my view.
Do you know what I think would be healthy? And I started bringing this into my content is detoxing from a very busy, high expectation world, where actually, just like fitness, just put it down to fitness. You go on your phone, or if we look at the average pattern of someone who has a phone and access to the internet, wake up in the morning, they don't even say hello to their partners. They're scrolling a very false highlight reel. They're then automatically comparing themselves. So now they're setting this expectation, which is so out of space, and then they're stimulating with caffeine. They're not really, and I find that until you detach and detox, you're not really remembering reality. You go out for a run and don't film it on social media. Just go out for a run and remember how hard it is, and the breathing and the fitness, and actually taking reality, and you remember, Jesus, I've got 24 hours in a day. I'm not going to carve a body of absolute a Greek god within 24 hours. This is going to take some time, and detoxing is really healthy, and it brings you back down to reality rather than.
And I love that Alex Hormozy idea that actually life should be in chapters. Because one of my biggest failings in my 20s is I wanted to produce music. I wanted to be really good at my job. I wanted to be really good in the gym. I wanted to do a martial art. I wanted to date. And I nearly blew myself up. I wanted to go clubbing at the weekend. You can't do everything in parallel. So like maybe spend 10 years sorting the money thing out and the career thing out, and then I will do far more personal trainer stuff and whatever once I've finished writing my books and getting my funds up in light somewhere else.
Always writing books.
Yeah, exactly. I know, madness. The other thing I want to say to your point about like taking a step back, it's a really interesting intellectual exercise. And I can't remember where it came from. Is so a Buddhist monk, your standard Buddhist monk, right, with a wooden begging bowl for their rice from the village and an orange robe, right? They have nothing. They basically rely on their community for the most basic food. And because of their training in sort of metaphysics and philosophy and everything else, they are happy, right? Not all of them, but if you ask a person, do you think most Buddhist monks are sort of quite content with their life, like the Dalai Lama or whoever? Or the answer is probably yes. And Who's that fantastic Indian guy who used to be a monk and is now Jay Shetty, right? Who I think's great. He's got this nasty blend of British and American accent now, which always happens when people mid-Atlantic. But I think his content's great. I think his ideas are great. And he comes from that monk background as to quite a lot of other folk. And the point I was going to make is, if somebody with nothing economically can be content, that's a really important lesson for all of us. Because what we want to do is strip everything out. Don't let your happiness rely on being wealthy or being really good looking or being whatever in external circumstances. Think about the Buddhist monk and try to be happy just resting in space, just breathing and going for a walk, and then realize that everything you add to the mix, watching TV. 99% of human beings who ever lived didn't get a chance to watch a really cool Netflix series that they found exciting and interesting. 99% of human beings who ever lived didn't get a chance to go on holiday to Spain or Italy or Greece or whatever. I wrote a piece a few years ago basically saying the world's the best it's ever been, right? And because of something called hedonic adjustment, a psychological bias that we humans have, the way our brains work, most people take completely for granted all of the fruits of modernity, how peaceful we are, how leisured we are, and then they put all this stress on themselves. Because if your basic philosophical position is, as long as I've got shelter, the love of my loved ones, food and water, if I've got all that covered, I'm better off than 99% of human beings who ever lived, right? Because they were on the verge of starvation, going out hunting, fighting against other tribes that were coming over the hill to throw spears at them. and right, we are better off than 99% of humans who ever lived, except that we choose not to be happy about it, which is completely nuts, right? And people should do a better job at realizing that, and realizing, my great-grandfather might have had to storm the beaches in Normandy and be shot at by Nazis with high-caliber machine guns, right?
We only learn worst case scenario. This is the thing. We all need a repercussion, and I think that this is the sad thing about humans. We tend to only change when it's gotten too bad. Like, for example, again, health is a prime example. You're overweight, you've got another 3 months, your cholesterol's through the roof, your blood pressure, your arteries are absolutely clotted. You need to dramatically change it. Not slowly. You need to dramatically change. And it's like we know the whole thing, we MOT our cars, but we don't seem to look after ourselves. And again, same respect when it comes to money. I just want to tap into something there before we move on to Dubai and tax, right? Because I'm interested to hear what you've got to say. Is that we hear a lot of this £10,000 a month. Everyone keeps focusing on this £10,000 a month, and I don't think when the average UK salary is £1,600 a month, people aren't really taking into consideration how significant £10,000 a month gross is. It's not achievable. Well, it is achievable, but it certainly is a process that you have to go through. Again, compound. You have to serve a lot of people. We're getting caught up with these clickbait numbers, but no one's really working out the number that would make them happy. Like you said, being content is like, if you're on £1,600, and I try and remind people on my TikTok lives, if you're earning, share with me how much you're earning, and people will put 1,500 to 2,000 on average, right? And I say, so now just imagine if you brought in £3,272. How dramatic your life now changes. Then is more achievable. Instead of thinking, oh yeah, I didn't think of it, so I only need to do another £1,500 a month, and then I actually have a comfortable life. Right? That's realistic.
Yeah. It's like, do you know Damien Jordan? Damien Talks Money.
Yeah, I've interviewed. Yeah,
exactly. Like, he was saying how, so he basically saved and invested for all of his 20s. Well, when he finally got himself out of debt in his early 20s, saved and invested, which then gave him, exactly that. He wasn't a multi-millionaire. He wasn't making £10,000 a month when he was in his early 30s. But what he had was a reasonable chunk of cash to ballast a few months of making a change, leaving his job, starting up as a YouTuber. And so my point was going to be is if you can do something on the side which boosts your income to 3 and a bit grand a month, save a bit more, invest more effectively. Life's about chapters. We keep going back to it. It's the long game, right? It's not, you can't do everything in 10 minutes. Like there's an amazing Bill Gates quote, which is like, most people massively overestimate what they can achieve in a year and massively underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. Think about 10 years, you know, and then, because if you're making 3.5 grand a month, but your living expenses are 2, and you can chalk away 1 in an ISA and invest in the market, it won't be that long before you've got tens of thousands of pounds to give you that sort of fuck you money to the boss that you hate or the job that you'd rather not do. Take a year. Like I can now work for a year without earning any money, and in that time I can figure this out, do that. So getting from 1,500 to 3.5 grand or whatever is hard, but doable. But then getting from 3.5 grand to 6 grand is the same again. And then getting from 6 grand to 20 grand is the same again. But don't look at the 20 grand, look at the next step, you know, look at the focus of the next few months and years.
I feel financial empowerment and having the fuck you money is, you know, it's and a lot of people in the UK would hate this, but it is the solution to a lot of problems out there.
Yeah,
like,
well, that's what this is.
Everything comes back to money. It's so funny because why do you argue with your partner? Stressed out about money. Why are you snapping at your kids? You're stressed out about money. Why do you find it hard where you're going to go for? Why do you struggle to decide where you're going to go for dinner? Because you're thinking about what it's going to cost.
Exactly, and so that's you know, the carrot and stick thing I was saying earlier. One of the biggest carrots is, this is something that's relatively simple to do, right? It takes time, but it's relatively simple to do. It's not rocket science. If you do it within a few years, your stress levels, and because the other thing about what our whole approach is, it's just you ignore the news. You don't try and learn how to trade. You're not on crypto groups going, which altcoin should I buy this week? Should I sell the one I bought last week? And this one's crashing. You obviate the need for any of that. You just do something relatively sensible every month for many, many years, and it changes your life. And then everything becomes easier. Like, to your point, everything becomes easier.
You know, it is funny because I share a lot of these stories, but when I was in my old job, you know, and they would be having these huge board like round tables, and they'd go, right, you've got to do this. And like, I literally quote myself, Andrew, I'd just go, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. and they'd go, oh, hey, why? Well, and then I'd give my logical reasoning. And it was because I knew that if I had to float myself through, I had to cash flow myself through for the next 12 months, I'm good. And so I was comfortable.
That's not
rich, but comfortable.
That's right. It's not just, you can turn around one morning and go, I don't like this, I'm resigning, goodbye, you know, which I've been able to do 3 times in a 20-year career in the city when I wanted to. It's exactly your point. It's like, if you don't necessarily want to leave the job because it's a good job and you like the income, then there are elements of it you don't like, and there are people that you don't necessarily agree with. You can disagree risklessly. You can be honest. You can say, no, that's bullshit, and call people out. Because worst case scenario, they go, oh, you're sacked then, and you go, fine, you know, no worries. And that is so much better than biting your tongue every day and thinking, oh, you know, this person's rubbish and I want to tell them. You know, like,
you don't lose self-esteem. You don't lack confidence. You don't devalue yourself. You don't disrespect yourself. You know, you can be your true self, which is, you know, we can go down the whole rabbit hole of why people end up with anxiety and depression, because they've become a shadow of a human being, because they've been battered down for so long by the crack of the whip, and they've not had that fun.
Well, but the other thing to say about that, which slightly goes back to my Buddhist monk point, it also goes to that's one of my bookshelves over there, right? There are several more throughout the house of a similar size, without wanting to sound too pretentious.
Yeah, I've got a few like that as well.
Well, I'm nearly 50, right? So it's not, you know, I wouldn't expect a 23-year-old to have read that much, but I'm not afraid or ashamed to admit, I'm a massive consumer of personal development books, or what British people pejoratively call self-help books, right? Because actually, things like anxiety is fears about the future, and the future is uncertain. And depression is beating yourself up with guilt about things that happened in the past, which you can't change, right? And you know, any good Buddhist knows that the way to get around anxiety and depression, anxiety about the future and depression about the past, is to live in the present, right? Is to be present, and you know, you can achieve that in any number of ways. It's not easy, but if you actually have learned all this stuff, if you've read half a dozen books about, you know, there's this brilliant guy, Mo Gawdat, who wrote a book called Solve for Happiness, who was a very senior person at Google, who lost his son, tragically, his like 21-year-old son when he was in his late 40s. huge tragedy. And he's like, how do I come to terms with this? How do I deal with this? And the book is about, I think it's really instructive, and it's one of many books. There's a book called Happy by Derren Brown, which is another really good one. There are loads of them, right? But the basic point being is, to your point earlier about everyone's a victim and everyone's blaming everyone else, is most people also haven't done any concerted study of what makes you happy. And most of the things that most people think makes them happy are the wrong things. Like, oh, I've got a Gucci handbag. Oh, I've got a Lamborghini. Oh, I'm going to Instagram myself on holiday in Ibiza at the cool pool party and feel better than everyone else for 30 seconds because my mate's on holiday in Scunthorpe. Or, like that doesn't make you happy. It absolutely. And so, but far too few people make a concerted study of the the 30, 40 years of psychiatric evidence, academic papers, research, tests, tens of thousands of people, psychiatric patients, depressed people, whatever, actually being evaluated, interrogated as to what is it that makes you happy. And as you know, it's self-discipline, it's eating well, it's getting good sleep, it's all these things. It's eating a banana every day, because a banana can, sounds, that's a short clip somebody can make me look like an absolute moron, eating a banana. But like, if it is, my big point is, it's like anything else. People are crap at finance because they never spend any time learning about it in any definitive way. Then they have these completely wrong, incorrect opinions about it, left, right, and centre. Like renting is throwing money away, paying someone else a mortgage. Wrong. Not necessarily true, right? The compound interest, you'll never become a millionaire investing 10% of your salary every month. Wrong. Completely incorrect. And similarly, people don't spend enough time actually sort of studying what is going to make them fulfilled and healthy and happy. And that's why we have so many unhappy people, because they don't spend any time learning about how to be happy. And finance is a huge part of that, which is why I talk about both things, because they're definitely related.
I was going to say, we are in a world where everyone loves to have a good argument on feelings and opinions, not facts. They just, well, that's how I feel. And but it's not a fact. We can't argue on it. We can't debate on it, because you're going off of feelings and views and thoughts and opinions.
And I'd say, look, if you are unhappy and angry and blaming everyone else, whether it's the government or somebody you hate or you disagree, you're an anti-vax person or you're a pro-vax or whatever, and you're being that keyboard warrior social media person, it's a very simple question to ask whether you're on your right track or not, right? Is, are you happy? No. Then you're not on the right track.
Yeah.
That's
around.
Yeah. So go and learn more about this stuff, because if it's a really strong signal. If you're being angry on social media and having a go at everyone, you've probably got some work to do.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true. And what I want to do, mate, is I want to get your sort of, for the last sort of 10 minutes, I want to get your take on, the tax in the UK is just, everyone's fed up of it, honestly. And I go back to, it doesn't seem to be quarterly anymore. I mean, we seem to be hearing and seeing dramatic changes, and people being sort of, pinched that little bit more on a monthly basis. It seems to be spoken about. There's a lot of big headlines out there and stuff. And obviously we're seeing a lot of people go, do you know what, bugger this, I'm going to Dubai. And I get it. And it does leave you with that feeling of thinking, we had this whole, and I won't say, I won't sign myself off here, but we had all these ministers, politicians during a certain period, a few years back, where tens of millions have just disappeared. They've not been questioned. It's literally just been vanished. And yet, the average person who's trying to start a business, we are being crippled in the UK. And it seems that anything we're trying to do to get ourselves ahead of the game is just being really, really pinched, and people are buggering off. What's your views? Like, is that the answer, Dubai? I don't know.
Well, sadly, I really don't want to be that guy. Assuming my business works out really nicely, I don't want to be the guy who goes to Dubai or Switzerland or California or whatever, just because I'm so fed up with Britain. But to be honest, it's gonna, it is really hard, because and it's what the irony is under a conservative government. So under Labour in the late 90s, we made some massive mistakes policy wise, like Gordon Brown's treatment of dividends, but basically the Tories have been a Labour government. They haven't been a conservative government for the last 4 years. And I don't really want to get into politics, but I guess all I'd say is that big government, if you crowd out the private sector, you don't create wealth. And if you then have to invent money out of thin air to invent wealth, you have an inflation problem. And that's what we've got. Because, I was writing about this the other day. So in Singapore, you are mandated to put 20% of your earnings into a pension product, right? And then the government matches 17% of that. So for the last how many decades, Singaporean people have been saving and investing 37% of what they earn, right? And so you look at that now, there's no way we could do that in Britain because the way we've calibrated everything, it just wouldn't work. But what does that mean? GDP per capita, average annual income for a person in Singapore is $83,000 a year and rising. And it's been rising for the last 30 years, right? GDP per capita in the UK is $43,000 and falling, right? And if you want to look at, so it's quite interesting, if you want to look at the experience of Switzerland, Dubai, Singapore, and South Korea, any of these sorts of places, and the experience of Britain in the last 40 years, it's enough to make you cry, right? And the counter argument to this of, small government, low tax, support innovation, have a sovereign wealth fund. Like Temasek, Singapore's sovereign wealth fund, has $400 billion, which they've been investing all over the world very well in the main. And that's benefiting every single person in Singapore. Britain doesn't even have that, apart from some tiny little British biotech bank or whatever that does a bit of private VC stuff, but it's tiny compared to what the Norwegians are doing, what the Middle Eastern countries are doing, what the Singaporeans are doing. And the counter argument to this is always, well, Scandinavia is really wealthy and successful and happy, and it's very left wing, and it's got really high tax rates, and everybody gets a great education system, blah, 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 which is actually completely fallacious, because if you look at, so I used to work for a Swedish investment bank, right? And what you've got to understand is the massive per capita resource endowment that places like Scandinavia have. Norway, 100% of their power just comes from hydroelectric power out of water running down mountains, right? So they don't have to worry about, everybody in the country has basically got free electricity or close to, right? They have unbelievable timber assets. They have zinc, they have copper. So they can afford a system where school teachers make 80,000 quid a year and taxi drivers make 80,000 quid a year. And although, the downside of that is Norway's incredibly expensive, right? And it's not doing a particularly good job at the moment of attracting entrepreneurs, because it's very hard to go and set up and run a business there. But this sort of the argument that, well, we can be high tax and then we can be, no, we can't, because we don't have the resource endowment per capita that those countries have that enables them to have a big welfare state. And Britain, we've basically done, I was speaking to the chairman of a FTSE listed business the other week, he said, if you actually look at the main policy decisions under Labour and the Conservatives since the 90s, we've basically done 180 degrees the wrong thing at every turn, both governments, right? If you wanted Britain to be more equal, wealthier, happier, fitter. And so, the trouble is, I think the political class in this country, a lot of them come straight out of university and go straight into being special policy advisors to ministers in Westminster, and they never actually experience the real world of trying to run a business. And so you're right, you and I are in a similar boat, and it is incredibly hard to run a small business in this country at the moment. The amount of red tape, so I can only recommend one of my investment funds to high net worth or sophisticated investors, right? Jeremy Hunt changed the definition of a high net worth and sophisticated investor on the 31st of January this year. It's to the extent that he basically made the threshold high. You had to be earning more and have more liquid assets. So that meant that there were 80% fewer people in the country that I could go to with my fund than there were the week before, right? And then it also meant I had to jump all these hoops, try to retool our website, retool our legal documentation, speak to a bunch of lawyers. So through most of February, I had to do all that because they'd made this ridiculously bad decision. Anybody with half a brain knew that was going to destroy innovation in Britain. Loads of small companies trying to raise money from angel investors. The worst, stupidest possible decision that you could ever make, made by a Conservative government, makes my blood boil. But what's even worse is, because everybody came out of the woodwork and said to them, by the way, do you realise how unbelievably stupid this policy is? You've made a terrible decision. There's not a single woman in Northern Ireland that now adheres to the threshold. So you've just destroyed all female-led businesses that want capital from other, female friends. For example, that was one of the lobby groups. So what did he do? On the 6th of March, they did a volte fast. They went back to the earlier thing. So after I'd spent a month dealing with all this red tape and nonsense and retooling everything and redoing my legal documents, they ripped it all up and changed it back the following month. And then, but the new stuff was all new. So I had to do it all again in March, right? And that's been genuinely prejudicial to my business. It's cost loads. It's cost me loads of time. And it's one example of just how egregiously incompetent our political class are. And to be honest, mate, sorry, I've been ranting away, but I don't know what the answer is. I genuinely don't, because it's so bad. And I think all you can do is say the government is going to take more than 50% of everything you do every year, comfortably more than 50%. And you just have to do the best you can do with what's left over, with the creaking infrastructure, and but we've made terrible decisions for 50 years.
I think what's a real shame is that one, the UK is not actually physically backed by anything, so we're just in this floating financial economy now, where we've got all this debt. We shouldn't really be paying any tax now, because it makes diddly squat difference really in the grand scheme of things. But we are seeing people move to Dubai, and it does get you thinking. I mean, I've even got a very close friend of mine who I didn't think I'd hear the words come out of his mouth, but he is now considering of moving, because he probably does, I don't know, 11 12 million a year, but
Yeah.
he is now like at the stage where I'm comfortably turning over the same amount every year, and I'm just sick of giving away now. Pretty much, as you said, it's pretty much half of it, and it really,
But it's not. But it's not even just the tax. It's how hard everything is. It's the red.
yeah,
It's red tape. It's the admin. It's the. I have to do more than 100 things a year, like in terms of tasks, right? Big tasks. More than 100 things a year to run an FCA regulated business, which is registered at Companies House and HMRC. Like that's like half of my day job is just filling in forms and doing admin, right? In Singapore, it's not like that. In Switzerland, it's not like that. In the UAE, it's not like that, and it's killing our companies for sure. But look, I hear you, because we wouldn't want everyone to think it's just like greed. It's like, oh, I want, I make 10 million a year. I don't want to give 5 million away. I want to only give 2 million away because I'm greedy. It's not so much about that, actually. It kind of is, because what do rich people do with their money? They employ people, they reinvest it, and they drive projects.
it's selfless. It's selfless.
Yeah.
A business. This is the thing that irritates me. Where I've heard people say, "Well, Jeff, he's stealing all this money, and he siphons off all this tax, and he's got offshore." And I'm like, "You're forgetting he's employing over 38,000 people."
Yeah, exactly.
They totally forget that it was a small company that had the idea to serve people, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what a company is. The more people you serve in being selfless, the selfish act is a fair exchange in value, right? Is a money.
Adam Smith. But that's right. I always say to people like, oh, people moan about billionaires, right? And it's like, billionaires are not like Smaug the dragon out of Lord of the Rings. They don't lie on a massive pile of gold and gems all day, going, look at my gold and gems. Everything they do is to they have hundreds of meetings a year with people like you and me, or like young entrepreneurs who want to do this, that, the other, and they go, yeah, you're compelling, I'll invest in you. They're employing thousands. Richard Branson was being pushed by some, frankly, idiot politician on something not that long, journalist, sorry. And he said, look, can I stop you? I think I've employed 1.5 million people in my time. Like, are you really going to have a go at my net contribution to tax, wherever it is? Like, 1.5 million people paying income tax, all of my companies paying corporation tax, every property I've ever built, owned or leased, taxes on that, VAT coming out of my ears. And this is and people don't get it. But what? Because the other thing that annoys me about the political system at the moment is, who's it worst for? Your mate who makes $12 million a year of revenues, he can go to Dubai. He can do whatever. He can, if he's in the UK, he can get lawyers involved. He can do it. When a country becomes sclerotic and has a massive top-heavy state and borrows money and has a tax bill of 100 billion quid a year of a interest rate bill on gilts or whatever it is now, and starts grinding to a halt and has terrible infrastructure and roads falling apart and the NHS having 7 million waiting lists, when we make these terrible decisions about policy, who is worst affected? Poor people, not rich people. And what I find so depressing about the current situation is that the people who are most negatively impacted by all this stuff want to vote for more of it, because most people don't understand the relationship between innovation, wealth creation, low tax. The worst people want to vilify billionaires until they want to leave, to the point we made earlier. What you want is a billionaire that's created an amazing company that's going to give you a job that pays you 60,000 quid a year, right? We want lots of those people creating lots of those jobs. At the moment, they're all leaving. Exactly right. And the people who suffer are the bottom 10% more than anyone else. And that's what's going on in the UK right now.
I think we could just carry on talking about this. The thing is, it's never ending. But I will say this, just as a heads up, I didn't realize I have 10% on my battery. So the worst thing would be is that this cuts off. But we could be talking about this forever, because there are so many issues to be addressed. But ultimately, I think what we can agree on is it comes back to a lack of education and a lack of giving someone the tools to try and do the best. But to answer the question of, is Dubai the answer? I have to say, I have had some long evenings thinking about it. I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
have. I really have, and
But,
I like
but,
the UK, and it'd be a shame, but I would be lying if I said I haven't thought
but the
about it.
cat, but the other, but the argument though, one of the arguments I went because I'm the same, right? I think about it. Maybe it's Switzerland, maybe it's whatever. But one thing that I come back to time and time again actually is when things are really, really bad, right? That's actually that's not the time to leave. Like it's like a stock market. The British economy, the whole British system is about the worst it's been in like since the early 70s, like in my life, and I'm nearly 50. So that's actually not the time to leave. That's the time to tough through and think that mean reversion happens, and there'll be a boom and some and ironically it might happen under Labour. I mean, like Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, and Tulip Siddiqui, who's the Shadow City Minister, are both listening to voices that I have a lot of time for and making some fairly sensible noises about things. So it's a bit like under Blair initially in the late 90s, but that was a lot more to do with tech and the internet, frankly, than what any politician was doing. The reason Britain got better in the late 90s, but who knows? Yeah, but I'm going to tough it out for another few years and see if I can make a small dent in making things a bit better.
Do it, do it. Well, look, Andrew, thanks so much for being here, mate. Loads of information. We'll get another part in, shall we, at some point, and we can maybe just niche into a couple of bits, but that we've loosely spoken about.
Well, I'd love to talk to you about. So my new book is about biotech, and it's like my view is that biotech is one of the things that could come sort of ride in on a white horse and save us, like in terms of environment, agriculture, wealth creation, pensions crisis. Like the biotech technologies coming down the pipe is so amazing that it could actually kind of sort everything out. So I'd love. It's called Our Future is Biotech, by the way. Gratuitous plug. It's up there on Amazon. But it'd be good to talk about that whenever you like, because I like to think people find that vaguely interesting.
Yeah, we'll do a lot of like what the future holds then. We'll do one on that. I think that would be a good podcast. And what I'll do, mate, I'll include everything about Andrew will all be in the description anyway. So you can go check out and go explore a bit more. But everyone who has watched up until this point, I'm actually gobsmacked that my DSLR camera has lasted this long because we've been going over an hour. Sometimes it cuts off at 45 minutes, but we're still here, which is great. So Andrew, thanks so much, dude. Links will all be in the description. Everyone who's been here, do hit like and subscribe, and look, leave us a comment on perhaps what you related to, or maybe things that you'd like Andrew and I to talk about in the next one. But until then, we'll see you all very soon.